The sun had not yet risen when Clara left the modest house she shared with her mother. The cold morning air cut through her skin, but she was used to the routine. Clara was a discreet young woman in her early 20s, living in a humble neighborhood. Since her father left, she dropped out of school to support the household, working as a waitress at a luxurious cafe frequented by the city's rich executives and businessmen. The cafe where Clara worked was the opposite of her simple life. The glass walls and elegant environment contrasted with her modesty. There, Clara was practically invisible. Always dressed in a perfectly white apron, she moved gracefully from table to table, serving coffee to the wealthy clientele who barely noticed her presence. However, this anonymity didn't bother her. She was used to being the person who doesn't disturb, the one who stays in the shadows. That particular morning, the cafe was busier than usual. A group of executives occupied the central table, discussing numbers and strategies that Clara would never understand. She moved quickly between the tables, serving cups of coffee and clearing empty plates. The strong aroma of coffee filled the air, mixed with the light perfumes of the wealthy clients. Among these clients was Gustavo, one of the city's most respected businessmen. He was the kind of person everyone admired, polite, successful, and above all, trustworthy. Clara observed him from afar as he conversed with his partner and best friend Victor. The two always seemed so close, like brothers, united not just by business but by a friendship forged over the years. Gustavo was an inspiring figure to Clara, someone who symbolized the success she believed was out of reach for people like her. On the other hand, Victor, though always smiling and charming, lacked Gustavo's honest charisma. Clara always felt something strange about him, as if there was something hidden beneath the surface. However, she could never have imagined what was about to happen. The morning passed normally until, during a moment of distraction, Clara, while refilling Victor's glass of water, overheard part of a conversation that made her stop in her tracks. With the water pitcher still in her hand, her attention was unintentionally drawn to the words Victor was speaking in a low, almost conspiratorial tone. Victor, thinking no one was listening, was speaking softly into his phone. "Everything is ready. Gustavo has no idea. As soon as the deal is closed, I'll have control of everything. He'll never know what hit him." Clara froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. He was planning to betray Gustavo, his best friend and partner of many years. Victor's voice continued, full of arrogance. "I've been planning this for months. The company, the assets, everything will be mine. He'll be left with nothing before he even realizes what's happened." Unintentionally, Clara's hand trembled, almost spilling the water. She quickly stepped away, her mind in shock. What had she just heard? Victor, the man who everyone believed to be Gustavo's loyal friend, was planning to betray him coldly and methodically. It was like watching a nightmare unfold. She needed to do something, but what? In the cafe's kitchen, Clara placed her trembling hands on the steel counter. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. What should she do? Telling Gustavo seemed like the right choice, but at the same time, what if he didn't believe her? She was just a waitress, someone insignificant. What would he think if a mere employee claimed to have overheard something so serious? Moreover, there was the risk of losing her job. If Victor found out she had exposed the plan, he would surely ruin her. And Gustavo, he might just think it was an absurd lie. Clara looked at her reflection in the metallic surface of the counter. Her eyes were filled with doubt, but deep down, there was a growing conviction. She couldn't let Victor destroy the life of someone as honest as Gustavo. The idea of standing by and watching such a betrayal was unbearable. The guilt and responsibility began to weigh more than the fear. For the first time, Clara decided she wouldn't stay silent. This was her chance to do the right thing, even if it came at a cost. She knew she needed to warn Gustavo. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Clara. The idea of confronting Gustavo consumed her, and the hours at work seemed endless. When Gustavo finally got up to leave, Clara gathered all the courage she could muster. She followed him to the cafe's exit and, seeing him alone, called out with a trembling voice, "Mr. Gustavo, can I talk to you for a moment?" Gustavo, somewhat surprised to be approached by an employee, stopped and smiled kindly. "Of course, Clara, you can talk." The young woman took a deep breath, her heart racing in her chest. I, I heard something. Something about you. I don't know if it's my place to say, but I think Victor is planning something. I overheard him on the phone talking about taking everything from you as soon as the deal is closed. Her words came out rushed, mixed with the fear of being misunderstood. Gustavo frowned, confused. The idea seemed absurd. Victor was his best friend, someone he had trusted for years. "I'm sorry, what?" Gustavo asked, trying to process what he had just heard. His voice held a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I'm telling the truth," Clara continued, her voice urgent. "I heard him say it himself. He's planning to take over your company and leave you with nothing." The initial shock began to turn into suspicion. Could this really be true? Was it possible that the man he had trusted for so long was planning such a betrayal? He glanced at the door where Victor had exited. Doubt crept into his mind, eroding the trust he had always had in his friend. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his tone now more serious. Clara nodded, her wide eyes full of sincerity. "I wouldn't be telling you this if it weren't true. I just couldn't let you enter that deal without knowing what I heard." Gustavo sat down, his mind racing. He had known Victor since they were children. They had built this company from the ground up together. The idea that Victor would betray him was almost incomprehensible. But something about Clara's behavior made him pause. She didn't seem like someone who would lie about something like this. "Thank you," Gustavo finally said, his voice lower now. "I appreciate you telling me." Clara nodded and quickly left, leaving Gustavo alone with his thoughts. The celebration that had seemed so certain minutes ago now felt fragile, on the verge of collapse. Gustavo looked at the contract on the table, his mind divided. If what Clara had said was true, then signing that deal could be the biggest mistake of his life. He had to be sure. He had to find out the truth. When Victor walked back into the cafe, smiling as if nothing had happened, Gustavo knew one thing for sure. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his best friend. Gustavo left the cafe with Clara's warning echoing in his mind. The young waitress had spoken with such sincerity, but what she said seemed unthinkable. Victor, his best friend and business partner for years, was actually betraying him? Gustavo tried to push the thought aside, but the doubt kept growing. Even though it seemed unlikely, he knew he couldn't completely ignore the warning. After all, he wouldn't have come so far in business without a certain level of caution and intuition. Gustavo got into his luxury car and, before starting the engine, looked at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Was everything really under control? Victor was the kind of person who always seemed to have a plan, but betrayal? Gustavo tried to recall any previous signs he might have missed. He had always trusted his friend blindly, and that trust now felt like a double-edged sword. Meanwhile, at the cafe, Clara tried to return to her routine, but the nervousness wouldn't leave her. She knew that by getting involved in the affairs of the rich and powerful, she might have triggered a series of problems for herself. What if Victor found out? What would Gustavo do with the information? She had no way of knowing, but the feeling of having done the right thing was stronger than the fear. Every order Clara attended, she felt the eyes around her, as if everyone knew what she had done. It was, of course, just her imagination, but the internal tension was real. Her hands trembled slightly as she served the tables, and her mind kept replaying the conversation with Gustavo. Would he believe her? The doubt tortured her. However, deep inside, Clara felt a small spark of pride. For the first time in a long while, she hadn't stayed silent, hadn't let fear control her. She had acted, and now all she could do was wait. On the other hand, Gustavo wasn't willing to let that doubt linger without answers. He knew he had to act cautiously, without raising suspicions. It was a delicate situation. Confronting Victor without concrete proof would be disastrous, potentially jeopardizing not only their friendship, but the future of the company. After hours of reflection, Gustavo picked up his phone and made a quick call. He knew just the person who could help him with this. Julian, a private investigator he had worked with on some sensitive business matters before. Julian was reliable, efficient, and discreet, exactly what Gustavo needed at that moment. "Julian, it's me, Gustavo. I need a favor." "Something very delicate," Gustavo said, trying to keep his voice calm, but feeling the weight of his words. Julian, always professional, responded directly. "Of course, Gustavo. What's going on?" Gustavo hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I need you to investigate someone for me. It's about Victor." The silence on Julian's end lasted a few seconds as he processed the information. Everyone in the business world knew how close Gustavo and Victor were, so the request sounded unusual. However, as always, Julian didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Understood. Send me what you have, and I'll start investigating." Gustavo sighed, relieved to have taken the first step. Now, everything depended on what Julian would uncover. Gustavo spent the following days trying to maintain composure, but the tension began to build. He continued his daily activities at the company, attending meetings and discussing strategies while trying to hide the growing doubt in his mind. Every interaction with Victor now felt like a minefield. Every word his friend said was analyzed meticulously. Was he pretending? Were all the laughs and conversations they had shared just a facade? Victor, as always, was smiling and confident, which only intensified Gustavo's anguish. How could the man in front of him, the one he had known since university, be capable of something so despicable? The two continued to work together, but Gustavo began to feel an ever-growing distance. Even without concrete evidence, he couldn't stop the feeling of betrayal that crept in every time Victor talked about the company's bright future with his usual enthusiasm. Was everything a lie? One afternoon, a few days after the cafe meeting, Clara went out to do her usual shopping. As she entered the local grocery store, fate placed her face to face with Gustavo. He was in the fresh produce aisle, and their eyes met. Clara immediately felt nervous. She had no idea how he would react now after her warning. Gustavo, on the other hand, smiled slightly and nodded politely. Clara hesitantly approached, curious but unsure. "Hi, Mr. Gustavo. I wanted to know if if you did something about what I said," she asked hesitantly, her voice low, almost a whisper. Gustavo glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. "Yes, Clara, I did. I hired an investigator, and he discovered that you were right all along." Gustavo hesitated, his voice faltering for a moment. "Victor? He's been embezzling money from the company for months. He's preparing to take over completely once the expansion deal is closed." Clara felt her blood run cold. She knew the situation was serious, but hearing Gustavo confirm her suspicions added a new level of gravity. Victor's betrayal was far deeper than she had imagined. I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "I only did what I thought was right." "And you did," Gustavo said. "If it weren't for you, I would have signed that deal without knowing what was happening. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Clara didn't know what to say. She was in a position she never expected to be in. From a simple waitress, she was now involved in a corporate drama that could destroy Gustavo's life. He looked at her, clearly grateful. And for a moment, Clara felt an unexpected connection. Gustavo, a powerful man, was vulnerable, and she had been the one to help him when he needed it most. Meanwhile, Julian was deep into his investigation. He had spent days discreetly analyzing Victor's finances, tracking his movements, and looking for any evidence that could validate Clara's claim. And soon, the first clues began to appear. Julian discovered that Victor was involved in several suspicious financial transactions. Small amounts of money were being subtly transferred to offshore accounts, amounts that added up to millions over the months. Victor was hiding his moves skillfully, but not enough to escape Julian's watchful eye. In addition, Julian found evidence that Victor had been in contact with the company's competitors. He was clearly preparing for a major move, something that would leave Gustavo vulnerable the moment the expansion deal was signed. That night, Gustavo received a call from Julian. He was sitting in his office, working late, reviewing contracts, when the phone rang. Gustavo's stomach clenched, knowing this call would bring important news. "Gustavo, I have some information for you," Julian began, his voice calm but firm. "It seems your friend isn't as innocent as you thought." Gustavo listened closely as Julian described the suspicious transactions and Victor's contact with competitors. Gustavo's stomach turned. Clara had been right. The betrayal was real, and Victor had been orchestrating a plan for months, hiding in plain sight. "I need more evidence, Julian. I need to make sure I'm ready to confront him." "I'm on it, Gustavo. This is just the beginning." Gustavo hung up the phone and sat in silence for a few moments. The pain of betrayal weighed like a block of concrete on his chest. The man he considered a brother had been plotting his downfall behind his back, and the hardest part to accept was that he hadn't seen it coming. After the shocking revelation from Julian, Gustavo remained motionless in his office, processing the magnitude of what he had just heard. The evidence of money being embezzled and secret negotiations with competitors painted a clear picture. Victor was betraying him in the worst possible way, and the plan had been in motion for months, perhaps even longer. Gustavo's mind raced. How had he not noticed? For years he had shared victories, defeats, and dreams with Victor, trusting him like a brother. Now everything he knew about their friendship was crumbling. The pain of betrayal hit him hard, like a direct blow to the heart. But he knew he needed to act. There was no more room for hesitation. Gustavo couldn't allow Victor to destroy his company, his legacy, or everything they had built together. With a deep breath, he picked up the phone and called Julian again. "Julian, I need everything you can get. I need concrete proof, something I can use to protect myself legally and, if necessary, to confront Victor directly." "I'm working on it, Gustavo. I'll have more detailed information soon. Stay sharp." The conversation was brief, but Gustavo knew he needed to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The weight of betrayal consumed him, but he also felt a silent anger growing inside. He wouldn't be destroyed by someone he had trusted blindly. While Clara was at home, sitting at the simple kitchen table she shared with her mother, she absent-mindedly ran her hand over the worn edges of the wood, her thoughts occupied by everything that had happened in the last few days. Since she had warned Gustavo about Victor's betrayal, she couldn't stop thinking about the possible consequences. On one hand, she felt satisfied for having done the right thing. If she hadn't spoken up, Gustavo would likely be on the brink of ruin right now, unaware of what was about to happen to him. But on the other hand, the tension of having gotten involved in something so serious weighed heavily on her shoulders. It was as if she had entered a world of intrigue and betrayal she had never been a part of. She also began to question what would come next. Did Gustavo trust her? Since their brief encounter at the grocery store, Clara hadn't heard from him. She hoped he knew what he was doing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that more was coming. She just didn't know what. One afternoon, a few days after Julian's revelation, Gustavo decided to visit the cafe where Clara worked. He needed a moment of normalcy, but he also wanted to see Clara again. He felt that he owed her something for warning him, and above all, he felt the need to open up to someone. Even though Clara was just a humble waitress, Gustavo realized she was much more than that. She was the key to the truth. When Clara saw him walk in, her heart raced. She became nervous at the sight of him walking toward her. Clara quickly wiped her hands on her apron, feeling her stomach turn. She approached him, hesitant. "Mr. Gustavo, it's good to see you again." Gustavo looked at her with a reserved smile, but his eyes showed fatigue. He gestured for her to sit with him at a more secluded table, away from the other customers. Clara, I need to thank you again for warning me. I hired an investigator, and he discovered that you were right all along. Gustavo hesitated, his voice faltering for a moment. Victor, he's been embezzling money from the company for months. He's preparing to take over everything once we close the expansion deal. Clara felt her blood run cold. She knew the situation was serious, but hearing Gustavo confirm her suspicions added a new level of gravity. Victor's betrayal was far deeper than she had imagined. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. I only did what I thought was right. And you did, Gustavo said. If it weren't for you, I would have signed that deal without knowing what was happening. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Clara didn't know what to say. She was in a position she never expected to be in. From a simple waitress, she was now involved in a corporate drama that could destroy Gustavo's life. He looked at her, clearly grateful, and for a moment, Clara felt an unexpected connection. Gustavo, a powerful man, was vulnerable, and she had been the one to help him when he needed it most. In the days that followed, Julian continued his investigation. He started uncovering more suspicious transactions and more evidence that Victor was hiding money in various offshore accounts. Victor seemed to be preparing for a massive coup, something that could leave Gustavo with nothing if he wasn't stopped in time. As the evidence piled up, Gustavo became more and more uneasy. His friendship with Victor was dead, but the pain of betrayal still haunted him. He was about to confront the man he considered a brother, and this confrontation would not be easy. Victor was cunning and, above all, dangerous. Gustavo knew he needed a solid plan and undeniable proof. He spent sleepless nights thinking about how he would approach the confrontation. Should he expose everything at once? Should he try to understand Victor's motivations or simply focus on protecting his company? Each night, Gustavo's anger grew, but he knew he couldn't act impulsively. Victor was not an easy opponent. During this time, Clara continued her routine at the cafe, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer the shy young woman who served tables unnoticed. Now she saw herself as part of something bigger, something that could really make a difference. Gustavo trusted her, and that gave her new strength. After their encounter at the cafe, Clara began to understand that her role in this story wasn't over. Gustavo was about to face a difficult battle, and in a way, she was part of it too. Clara realized that there was more at stake than just saving Gustavo's company. She was involved in a process of personal growth, a journey of self-discovery that made her question what she really wanted for her own life. She felt drawn to the possibility of helping Gustavo in a more active way. Perhaps this was her chance not only to change her own life, but to do something significant. Clara knew that if she could help Gustavo win this battle, she would also win in some way. Finally, the day came when Gustavo knew he couldn't wait any longer. He now had enough evidence to confront Victor and expose the betrayal. It was time to face the enemy he once called a friend. Gustavo summoned Victor to a confidential meeting in his office, under the pretense of discussing the closing of the expansion deal. As he waited for Victor's arrival, he looked at the documents on his desk, the undeniable proof of the betrayal. It was like looking at an open wound. Victor walked into the office, as always, smiling and confident. He had no idea what was about to happen. But Gustavo was ready. The final confrontation was about to begin. Victor entered Gustavo's office with the same confidence he always displayed. His posture was relaxed, the fake smile plastered on his face, as if nothing in the world could shake his composure. Gustavo, however, could no longer see his longtime friend the same way. Every gesture of Victor's, every word, now seemed loaded with duplicity. The man he once knew was dead to him, and in his place stood only a calculating traitor. Gustavo stood up from his chair and gestured for Victor to sit down. The tension in the air was palpable, but Victor, completely oblivious to what was about to happen, didn't seem to notice. "So how's everything looking for the deal?" Victor asked casually, as if this was just another business meeting. "Are we ready to finally seal our future?" Victor's words burned in Gustavo's mind. Our future? That was enough to make Gustavo's blood boil, but he knew he needed to stay in control. The confrontation had to be calculated and precise. "Actually, Victor," Gustavo began, with a cold calm he could barely maintain, "there's something we need to discuss before closing anything." Victor raised an eyebrow, slightly intrigued but still confident. He had no idea what was coming. Gustavo leaned forward and opened a folder full of documents that were on the table. Every sheet of paper, every number, was concrete proof of Victor's betrayal. With slow, almost deliberate movements, he spread the evidence in front of Victor. "Here are bank transfers, offshore accounts, negotiations with competitors," Gustavo said, his voice firm and controlled. "Everything points to you, Victor. You've been embezzling money from the company for months, preparing to take over and leave me with nothing." Victor's smile vanished instantly. His face turned pale as his eyes scanned the documents. He had been caught. Gustavo knew the shock was real, but he also knew Victor wouldn't give up easily. Victor leaned back in his chair, still trying to maintain his facade of control, but it was clear he was processing the new reality. "I don't know what you're talking about, Gustavo," he responded, trying to sound calm, but his voice wavered slightly. "This is all. It's not what it seems." But Gustavo was prepared for this. He knew Victor would try to manipulate the situation. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Victor?" Gustavo's words came out sharp as blades. "Do you think I wouldn't know that someone's been stealing from me? You played with my trust, and I was foolish enough not to see it before. But now, I have all the proof I need." Victor tried to form a response, but the evidence was there, too clear to be contested. The silence in the room lasted a few seconds. Victor's game was over. He couldn't deny what Gustavo had uncovered. So instead of continuing to deny, Victor changed tactics. He leaned forward, his smile reappearing, but this time it was a bitter smile, filled with resentment. "So that's it," Victor said with a tone of disdain. "You caught me. Congratulations." Gustavo watched in silence, waiting for Victor's next move, which, as always, didn't disappoint. "But do you want to know why, Gustavo?" Victor asked, his voice suddenly lower and darker. "Do you want to know why I did it? Because I got tired of living in your shadow. From the first day we started this company, you were always the golden boy, the visionary, everyone's darling. And me? I always stayed behind, doing the dirty work, without any recognition." Victor's words were full of bitterness, and Gustavo finally saw the true face of the man he had considered his friend. "You made yourself out to be a saint, Gustavo, always so righteous, so just. But you never acknowledged how much I did for this company. I carried you on my back while you showed off, and I got tired of being number two." Gustavo couldn't believe what he was hearing. "That's it? All the betrayal, all the schemes, just out of envy? You're doing this because you wanted more credit?" Gustavo asked, the disbelief evident in his voice. "It's not just that, Gustavo," Victor replied, now more fiercely. "I wanted what I deserve. I deserve more than just being your right-hand man. I deserve to be the boss." The silence that followed was full of tension. Gustavo stared at Victor, trying to understand the level of resentment that had been hidden under the surface for so long. Their friendship, their partnership, everything now felt like a lie. Victor crossed his arms, still leaning back in his chair, waiting for Gustavo's reaction. Gustavo shook his head, disillusioned. "It's unbelievable that you think that you justified all this to yourself, as if I were the villain. But now you're going to pay for your choices." Gustavo returned to his desk and picked up the phone. "I've already taken all the necessary measures," he said as he dialed a number. "Your accounts are frozen, Victor. The money you stole, it won't do you any good now." Victor's eyes widened, his cynical smile disappearing for the first time. He had underestimated Gustavo. What? What did you do? Victor stood up abruptly, his calm evaporating. Gustavo remained firm. I did what any sane person would do to protect themselves. I froze your accounts, reported your scheme to the authorities, and I'm ready to sue you. You've lost, Victor. Victor's expression hardened, the charm he usually wore like armor gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. You think you've won, don't you? You think freezing my accounts is enough? I have connections, Gustavo. You don't know who you're messing with. Gustavo met his gaze evenly. I know exactly who I'm messing with, and I'm not afraid of you or your so-called connections. You're finished, Victor. Victor took a step back, his bravado crumbling as the reality of the situation set in. He was trapped, and he knew it. His years of planning, his meticulous scheme to take over the company, everything was unraveling before his eyes. You're going to regret this, Victor muttered, his voice low and full of venom. You'll regret ever crossing me. Gustavo didn't flinch. I regret trusting you. I regret ever calling you a friend. With that, Victor stormed out of the room, leaving Gustavo alone in the empty office. The weight of the confrontation pressed down on him, but there was also a sense of relief. He had taken the first step in protecting his company and his legacy. The cost had been high, but Gustavo knew he had done the right thing. In the days following the confrontation, Gustavo remained vigilant. Victor's betrayal had left deep scars, not only on their friendship, but on Gustavo's ability to trust those around him. He had frozen Victor's accounts and reported him to the authorities, but something inside Gustavo told him that Victor wouldn't give up that easily. He was right. One morning, as Gustavo sat in his office reviewing documents related to the company's expansion project, his phone buzzed. It was Julian, the private investigator. We've got a problem, Julian said, his tone urgent. Victor's still at it. Gustavo frowned, feeling a surge of unease. What do you mean? Julian explained that Victor had been making moves behind the scenes despite his accounts being frozen. He had contacted several media outlets trying to sell a story that could damage Gustavo's reputation. He's trying to play dirty, Julian continued. He's fabricating details about your business dealings, making it look like you've been involved in illegal activities. He's trying to create a scandal. Gustavo's stomach twisted. This was exactly what he had feared. Victor wasn't just after the company anymore. He was after Gustavo's reputation. If he succeeded, everything Gustavo had worked for could be ruined. Not just his business, but his standing in the industry. What kind of story is he trying to sell? Gustavo asked, his voice tight. Julian hesitated for a moment. He's claiming that you've been hiding profits in offshore accounts, that you've been involved in shady dealings with foreign companies. It's all fabricated, of course, but if the media runs with it, Gustavo felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Victor was willing to do anything to destroy him. We can't let this get out, Gustavo said, his mind racing. Is there anything we can do to stop him? We're already on it, Julian assured him. I've contacted the media outlets he's been talking to, and we're preparing our own narrative to counter his. We'll release the truth about what he did, about the embezzlement, the offshore accounts he used, and the betrayal. Once we present the real story, Victor's lies won't hold up. Gustavo nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. And what about Victor? Can we stop him from trying this again? That's the other piece of good news, Julian said. We have enough evidence now to take legal action. Between the frozen accounts, the financial records we uncovered, and this latest attempt to smear you, we've built a solid case. Your legal team is ready to move forward. Victor's running out of options. Gustavo leaned back in his chair, the tension that had been building for days finally starting to ease. They were getting closer to ending this nightmare. Let's go ahead with the plan, Gustavo said. It's time to put an end to this. In the days that followed, Gustavo's legal team worked tirelessly to prepare their case against Victor. They filed charges for fraud, embezzlement, and defamation, ensuring that Victor would face the full consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, Julian's team worked to counter the false narrative that Victor had tried to spread. One morning, the headlines broke. The truth about Victor's betrayal was exposed. His financial misconduct, his attempts to steal the company, and his attempt to ruin Gustavo's reputation. The media quickly picked up the story, and within hours, Victor's name was splashed across the news as the villain in a corporate scandal. Gustavo watched from his office as the news unfolded, feeling a sense of vindication. Victor had tried to destroy him, but now it was Victor who was facing the consequences. As the legal battles continued, Gustavo received a knock on his office door. It was Clara, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "It looks like everything's finally coming to light." Gustavo nodded, his gaze still on the computer screen where the headlines scrolled by. "It's over," he said. "At least the worst of it is, Victor's going to have to face the consequences of what he did." Clara stepped closer, standing near his desk. "You've been through a lot these past few months," she said softly. "I'm glad you came out on top." Gustavo looked at her, grateful for her steady presence. She had been there for him through it all, and now, with Victor's threats neutralized, he could finally start thinking about the future. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara," he said sincerely. "You've stood by me through all of this." Clara smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm just glad I could help." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension of the last few months finally beginning to fade. Victor's attempts to tear them apart had only strengthened their bond. Gustavo realized that Clara had become more than just someone who helped him. She was someone he trusted, someone who had been by his side when everything seemed to be falling apart. "You've been more than just help," Gustavo said, his voice lower now. "You've become someone I can rely on, someone I trust." Clara's expression softened even more, and she gave a small nod. "I feel the same way." Gustavo smiled at her, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. "I think we make a good team," he said. Clara chuckled softly. "I think so too." As the tension of the past few weeks slowly dissipated, it was replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Victor had tried to tear them apart, but instead, he had brought them closer. Now, with the worst behind them, they could finally start looking toward the future. "Let's get back to work," Gustavo said, extending his hand to Clara. "We've got a lot to look forward to." Clara took his hand, smiling. "Absolutely," she said. Together they walked out of the office, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. With Victor defeated and his betrayal exposed, life at the company slowly began to return to normal. The legal battles were well underway, but Gustavo felt a sense of peace, knowing that his legacy was protected. Clara, now fully integrated into her new role, was thriving in ways that neither she nor Gustavo could have imagined. Every day, Clara arrived early, eager to tackle the challenges that awaited her. She poured herself into her work, determined to make the most of the opportunity Gustavo had given her. The transition from waitress to corporate employee had been overwhelming at first, but with the support of her colleagues and mentor, Sandra, Clara quickly found her rhythm. Sandra continued to guide Clara through the complexities of corporate finance and operations. As Clara absorbed more knowledge, she began to stand out, not just for her work ethic, but for her sharp analytical skills and creative problem-solving abilities. She brought a fresh perspective to the team, often suggesting ideas and solutions that others hadn't considered. It wasn't long before her contributions started to attract attention. David, the company's CFO, was particularly impressed by her ability to foresee potential financial pitfalls and propose ways to mitigate risks. Clara's background in economics gave her a unique vantage point, and she used it to identify opportunities for growth and improvement in ways that even senior team members hadn't anticipated. As Clara became more comfortable in her new environment, her confidence grew. She no longer felt like the shy waitress who had once been invisible to the rich and powerful. Now she was part of that world, and she belonged there. Her colleagues respected her, and her ideas were taken seriously. Gustavo, meanwhile, kept a close eye on Clara's progress. He saw how quickly she was adapting, how her natural talent and drive were making her an invaluable part of the company. He had always believed in her potential, but watching her grow into a leadership role was more than he had hoped for. Clara had proven herself to be one of the company's rising stars. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Gustavo called Clara into his office. She entered with her usual smile, still sometimes amazed at how much her life had changed in such a short time. "You wanted to see me?" Clara asked as she took a seat across from his desk. Gustavo leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through these past few months," he began, his voice calm but serious. "And I realized that I owe you more than just a thank you." Clara tilted her head slightly, unsure of where the conversation was heading. "You've already done so much, Gustavo," she replied. "I don't expect anything more." Gustavo smiled warmly. "That's exactly why you're special. You never expected anything, even though you deserved it. And that's what makes you stand out. You went above and beyond, not just for me, but for the company. And I think it's time we recognize that." Clara's eyes widened slightly, a sense of anticipation building inside her. "I want to offer you a permanent leadership position," Gustavo continued, his voice firm and sincere. "You've proven that you can handle high-level responsibilities, and I think it's time you had a seat at the executive table. I'd like you to join the senior management team, overseeing our international operations." Clara blinked, her heart racing. A leadership position? She had been with the company for a short time, and now Gustavo was asking her to take on such a significant role. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You want me to take on a permanent leadership role?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Gustavo nodded. "Yes. You've shown me and everyone else at this company that you're more than capable. You've been instrumental in helping us expand, and I can't think of anyone more suited for this position." For a moment, Clara was speechless. She had started as a waitress, overhearing a conversation that changed the course of her life. Now she was being offered one of the most prestigious positions in the company. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, overwhelmed with emotion. "This is more than I ever imagined." Gustavo smiled, leaning forward. "You've earned every bit of it, Clara, and I want you to know that this isn't just about what you did for me personally. It's about what you've brought to this company, the ideas, the innovation, the leadership. You've made us better." Tears pricked the corners of Clara's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now it felt like everything was finally falling into place. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll do everything I can to live up to it." "I have no doubt that you will," Gustavo said with a warm smile. "And don't worry, you won't be doing this alone. We'll be working closely together, just as we have been. I'm excited to see what we can accomplish." Clara nodded, her heart full of gratitude. She had worked so hard to get here, and now she felt like she truly belonged. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was her future, her career, and her chance to make a real difference. As she stood to leave, Gustavo stopped her with a gentle smile. "There's one more thing," he said. Clara turned, curious. "We'll be having a company-wide celebration next week," Gustavo explained. "It's to celebrate the success of the expansion project, but I also want to use the opportunity to officially announce your new role to everyone." Clara's heart skipped a beat at the thought. She had always been someone who preferred to work behind the scenes, but now she was being asked to step into the spotlight. It was daunting, but also exciting. "I'd be honored," she said softly, feeling a swell of pride. Gustavo stood, extending his hand to her. "Welcome to the leadership team, Clara." Clara shook his hand, smiling through her tears. "Thank you, Gustavo, for everything." The celebration came quickly, and the atmosphere at the company was electric. The event was held in a grand ballroom, with everyone from the newest hires to the senior management team in attendance. There was an air of excitement and pride, knowing that the company had weathered the storm of Victor's betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Gustavo took the stage, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He spoke about the challenges they had faced, the success of the expansion, and the bright future ahead for the company. As he spoke, Clara stood off to the side, feeling a sense of awe at how far they had come. "And now," Gustavo said, his voice echoing through the room, "I'd like to recognize someone who played a crucial role in our success. Someone who demonstrated extraordinary courage, intelligence, and leadership. Clara Adams." The room erupted in applause as Gustavo gestured for Clara to join him on stage. Her heart raced as she made her way to the front, her hands trembling slightly, but she held her head high. This was her moment. "Clara has been an essential part of our success," Gustavo continued, "and today I'm proud to announce that she will be taking on a permanent leadership role, overseeing our international operations as part of our senior management team." The applause grew louder, and Clara felt a wave of pride and gratitude wash over her. She had worked hard to get here, but she couldn't have done it alone. Gustavo had given her the chance, and now she was determined to make the most of it. As she took the microphone, she looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom had become her friends and colleagues over the past few months. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "To Gustavo, to the team, and to everyone who has supported me along the way. I never imagined I'd be standing here today. But I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm excited to continue working with all of you to make this company even better." The applause echoed again, and Clara smiled, feeling the warmth and support of everyone around her. This was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Clara settled into her new role, quickly proving to be an effective and respected leader. Gustavo, as always, was by her side, guiding her when needed, but trusting her to make her own decisions. Their partnership grew stronger by the day, and together, they led the company into a new era of success. One evening, as Clara walked through the office long after most of the team had gone home, she paused for a moment to take it all in. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she had made it. She had found her place. As she looked out at the city skyline, she knew this was just the beginning of a bright and promising future.